KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger, a public affairs program featuring stories from all over the Central Valley with Sevag Tateosian, 90.7 KFSR.
Welcome to the Central Valley Ledger, a show highlighting community members that have a positive influence on the Valley. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we're recording out of the beautiful downtown Fresno studios of the Community Media Access Collaborative in Fresno and Clovis. We're broadcasting on 90.7 KFSR and CMAC's public channel. In this edition of the Central Valley Ledger, we'll be talking to artist and author Linda Caine. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
In reading your background, I was really fascinated by, the diversity there. So you're originally from Zimbabwe?
That's right, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
People tend to think, because I was born in Zimbabwe, that I was the child of a missionary or people in the forces. But in fact, my grandfather's brother was a botanist with the Smithsonian Institute here in America. And in 1889, there was going to be a total eclipse of the sun in West Africa. And my grandfather's brother was going to go as the helper for the head of the botany section. But at the last moment, that gentleman couldn't go. So he ended up being the head of the botany side of the expedition. And he grabbed his younger brother and told him to go as his helper. And the two brothers fell in love with Africa. So they stayed, which is how come we were all born out there.
How long did you stay in Zimbabwe?
I was born there 1951, and I left in 1976. But between that time, my family had to move up to Zambia. Would you like me to go into that a little more?
Sure. Tell us a little bit about that.
My father was an amazing man. Zimbabwe at the time was Rhodesia, and Rhodesia was a very racist country. And my father had always taught us that you don't judge people by their color, you judge them by who they are. And when my mother had left when I was very young and left my father with 4 children, and so we were raised by housekeepers because he had to travel a lot. And he fell in love with one of the housekeepers, who happened to be a black lady, and married her. And he was allowed to marry her. There was not apartheid like there was in South Africa, where it was actually illegal for races to mix. So he was allowed to marry her, but then he lost his job and nobody would employ him. And he was afraid the white children were going to be taken away. So we literally lost everything. We packed everything into a little van, went north to Zambia.
That's fascinating. Do you think that he had trouble finding a job because of who he fell in love with and decided to marry?
Absolutely.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so I detect a little accent in you as you speak. Is that Zimbabwe, Zambia, or is, some people may think it's English?
It's a little bit of everything. It's from nowhere in particular anymore, because when I left Zimbabwe, again, the war in Zimbabwe had got really bad. And at that time, my husband is an attorney, and he was working with Amnesty International, trying to get people who'd been detained without trial either brought to trial or released. And we got into a situation, which is quite a long story, where we had to get him out of the country.
Your husband?
My husband. Now, he was also born and raised in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia as it was then, but his parents had been born in England. And the only country that would take us immediately was England. So I was too pregnant to travel with him. So we had to just get him on a plane. He left, and I waited until our baby was born and then followed him. So the accent is Zimbabwe, English, American.
Do you get any comments on the accent by any chance if you're out in public? Do people ask you about it?
They do, and I actually forget I have it a lot of the time until people ask me. But it's really nice, because sometimes in England, people don't particularly like the strong accents, like Australian, New Zealand, and African. And it's hard to talk knowing that you're irritating people just by talking. So it's actually wonderful being here where people like the accent.
Actually, I love the accent, so I want to compliment you on it. So you could talk to us all you want.
Thank you.
You're an artist and an author. I would love to talk to you about the background, and because it sounds like you've been surrounded by people who were very caring.
Yes.
Your father,
Yeah.
your husband.
Yep.
Do you think that has impacted you?
Oh, absolutely, yes, because unfortunately, because of the situation in Africa, our childhood was really fragmented and not very stable. So yes, having an incredible example as a father and very supportive husband has impacted me tremendously.
So let's talk a little bit about you now. You are an author and an artist. Let's talk a little bit about your art.
Okay.
I read in your background that you had to teach yourself a little bit of art. Can you explain that?
Yes, because of the situation in Africa, at the time, my family's situation, my formal education ended when I was 14 years old, so I believe that over here would be a grade 8 education. And there were no colleges or adult education, so I loved art, and I would cut out magazine pictures or just go out and draw what I saw. I just loved it, so I just taught myself how to do that. And then eventually I taught myself how to do calligraphy as well because I loved writing. And Sevag, I had the privilege of being raised in a situation where I didn't see there was no television, and I didn't see television till I was 14. And
Wow.
our entrance hall in Africa was floor-to-ceiling books. And so our family, we just read voraciously. We would just be lying around reading books. So that gave me a love for the written word, and that developed into the artistic side as well.
Speaking of your art, in a little bit, we're going to show a picture of a hippo, and I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit about the hippo. Of all the art pieces that you've done, do you have a favorite?
I love horses. So I think because of my love for horses and my love for Africa, the combination is the zebra.
Ah, interesting.
And because I'm actually doing a series at the moment, I believe we have one that I'm not sure if it will come up, but of an entrance hall where I have some of my zebra paintings. And I love the fact that just with the black and white, with the black lines, you can get the shape of the animal with no shading whatsoever.
And speaking of that, we are showing now the entrance hall that you were talking about. Beautiful photos there. There's zebras, and there you go. This is what you're talking about.
And the interesting thing is there are also geometric patterns, which are very African. Now, because I was born and raised in Africa, the geometric patterns come very easily to me. And yet Diane Brewer, who is the owner of Fresno Art Hub Gallery, where I have my studio, she's American, but she was raised in India. And the patterns that come to her easily are those beautiful Indian swirls. And it's just interesting to see the difference between us because of where we were raised.
And I am going to have Diane on the program too, because I think that she would be an excellent interview talking about Fresno Art Hub. Let's look at this hippo now and tell us a little bit about this hippo.
The hippo, is it the one with them in the water?
It's just the one.
Just the one, okay. I wanted to show the size of them because there is another photograph which I hope will come up where they're in the water. And when you're in a boat in the water in Africa, you sometimes just see the eyes and the ears, and it'll disappear and it'll come up and you think there's one hippo. And then the next moment, another hippo pops up and another one, and all you can see are the eyes and the ears. And it's only when they get out of the water that you see how many, should I say how huge they are. And as far as how many they are, you never really know because they're popping up and down in the water. And hippo cause the most deaths in Africa of any animal.
Interesting. What did you think of Africa? I mean, it sounds like you really enjoyed your time there, and it influenced you.
Yeah, I loved Africa, still love Africa. It's a place like no other. Whenever I go back and I get off the plane, I think, how can I ever leave this place again? I never thought I would have to leave the way we did. And I never thought I'd never be able to go back. But the sad thing is, when I'm there for a while and you see how unstable it is, especially once I had children. When I went back with my children and had to live with the instability and the crime. It's desperately sad. So I miss it terribly, but I couldn't go back to live at this point.
I think right now our television audience and our radio audience are wondering how from Zimbabwe to Zambia to England, how you ended up in Fresno of all places. By the way, I'm glad you're here, and we're glad you're here.
I'm glad you're glad I'm here.
But it's a little fascinating when you hear that you have traveled to these wonderful places, and you're in Fresno. Fresno is wonderful too, but you know, you could have been in LA, you could have been in New York, but we're privileged to have you. Why?
I have a confession, but it changed very quickly. We actually ended up in Turlock.
Which is even more interesting.
Because my brother was with the university there, and my father lived there, and my sister lived there. They had emigrated. Because my father's father was born in America, although he was born in Africa, he was able to come over here. And then by the time when Chris and I left Zimbabwe, went to England, we lost everything, and it took us 16 years to save up enough to come over to America. And by then my dad was a citizen, so he could apply for us. So we started off where we had family. And Chris took the California bar. He's taken the bar on 3 continents. He's an amazing man. And he put his resume out. And he got an interview in Fresno. Now, I had been to Fresno about 2 weeks before that to a seminar, and I'd come off the 99, got lost. My first time in Fresno, got lost downtown. And I went back, and I was still in shock, I think, when I went back. I got so lost. There was no GPS or anything then. And I went back, and Chris said, "Oh, I have an interview in Fresno." I said, "No, I've been there. We don't want to go there." But in fact, he came for the interview, and we love Fresno now. Absolutely love it. And if I can just do a little bit more of a plug there.
Sure.
There are people in Fresno who will say, "Why Fresno, of the places you've lived in Africa and England?" And I've said, you know, the people in Africa and England, when I tell them I live in the Central Valley where I can see the San Joaquin Mountains, the Sierra Nevada Mountains, and I can go to Yosemite just a few hours up north. I can go to San Francisco, I can go skiing, I can go to the ocean. They think I live in the most amazing place, and I do. So.
And I agree with you, and so do our audience members, I bet you. We live in a fascinating place. One of my favorite pictures is a picture of lions, and there are baby lions as well. So we're going to show that right now. Can you explain, by the way, are you the one that's taken these photos?
Yes.
So talk about the lions.
Okay. I went to visit Africa, and my brother took me to the Zambezi Valley, and we stayed there, and he took me out on a safari. It was amazing. And we were so fortunate. We'd been looking for lion, and then we got a radio call saying that somebody else in a Land Rover had discovered this pride that had just eaten. And so they told us where to go. And when we went there, there were these lionesses. We didn't see the male lion, and we were in an open Land Rover. But he said, "Don't worry, they're all so full, they're not going to move." And I've never seen anything like it. They just lay there. They had gorged themselves, and the cubs had gorged themselves as well. And the tummies, the little stomachs of these cubs were like little balls, and they were just all flattened. And then, interestingly, there was a noise next to us, and there was a bush next to us, and the male lion, because they were saying, I wonder where the male lion is, he can't be far. He was right next to us, hiding the kill. He'd pulled it into this bush and was literally about 6 feet away from the Land Rover.
Wow.
So that was scary.
That in itself could be a very interesting experience. Before I get off the topic of art, because we're going to talk about your book. Your book is going to be coming out here shortly, so we're going to talk about that. But talking about art, how are we in Fresno regarding art? I mean, you know, some people say it's a great town for art.
Yeah.
We have Art Hub, We have different things, studios. And some people will say, Fresno doesn't have any art culture. What say you?
I, again, love Fresno, and I love the art culture here. And I am so fortunate to be with Fresno Art Hub. I'd known Diane Brewer for a number of years, and when she opened the gallery, I began exhibiting there. And then she moved to a larger space where there was a little room on the side, which was self-contained. So I took that as my studio. And the reason I love Fresno Art Hub is a lot of galleries, when I go into them, it's almost a them and us, even though I'm an artist. And you're almost in awe at all the paintings and everything. Whereas with Diane, you walk in and it is inspiring. She has an incredibly diverse amount of artists there, with the subject matter, with the classes that she gives. She does things from Deborah Pepin does poured inks, Sue Porter does oils. Diane herself was the founding member of the Alliance of California Artists.
Interesting.
And that's where they exhibit now, at the Art Hub. But to me, the difference is you go into the Art Hub and it inspires you to create. So as far as the whole art scene is concerned, she would be more the one, because she's been here for so long, to have her finger on the pulse of it. But as far as I'm concerned, from somebody who just does art,
Right.
I love it. I love the diversity we have here in Fresno.
Yeah.
You've got little galleries that people are starting up on their own. You've got the bigger galleries. I really love it. I think we're very fortunate.
There are some art studios around us here as we sit and talk, and then Oddity Americas is just catty corner from here. So we've got art here as well near us as we sit and talk. Your book. Let's talk a little bit about this book that's going to come out. What is it about?
It's an autobiography.
Okay.
Just because I've had a very unusual life, and it was born in a very unusual way. I actually, with everything that had happened to us, with us having to leave Africa and go over to England with just our son, and then Chris had to requalify, we really, really struggled. But the strange thing was, when everything fell into place, Chris was an attorney over there, and he represented the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was the spiritual advisor to the royal family. So like when Charles wanted to marry Diana, Chris's law firm was all part of that.
Interesting.
And he actually met Princess Diana, which was an incredible privilege. So he did really well. We had this lovely house with space enough for me to have a studio, and I had a crashing emotional breakdown. It was just like when everything got together, I fell apart and didn't know why. I almost took my life.
Wow.
It was serious, and Chris took me to my doctor, who sent me to a therapist. And I worked with Robin for about 3 years just to try and work out what had gone so badly wrong.
Robin is the therapist?
Robin is, yes, Robin Royston, amazing man. And I came through that, and then we had the opportunity to come to America. We came to America, and about 2 or 3 years after we arrived here, I was still in contact with Robin. We wrote to each other. He's a good friend of the family now. And the next thing, I got a phone call saying, I've written a book, and I went to see my literary agent in London, Lucas Alexander Whitley, and I told them about you. I just said I had this patient once who'd had a very unusual life, and they said, could I call you and ask if you would be prepared to write a book? So I said, sure. And it's very scary because it's a very exposing book, because it's about my breakdown.
Well, and so you have to be comfortable. I don't mean to interrupt you, but,
oh, no,
but
no.
Someone who writes a book like that has got to be comfortable enough for the world to hear the story.
Yes.
So you're there.
Sevag, when it was first published, when it was first released, and I went over to England for the release, I saw it in the shops, and I thought, wow, we did it. I can't take it back. It was just knowing that it was out there was really scary. But it's actually written in 3 sort of voices. It introduces me as I crash into the breakdown without knowing why. Then it introduces Robin as he reads a letter from my doctor saying, please could he see this lady as a matter of urgency. And then my autobiography is told as I tell Robin about my life and we try and work out what went wrong. So people have found it very interesting, and as did I, because not many people really get to hear their therapist's side of the story. When I was going through the breakdown, I thought he had a handle on everything and it was all okay. And then to find out afterwards that there were times he was thinking, you know, she's going to die.
Wow.
So it was a very interesting walk for me, and it was amazing because it was picked up by Random House, fabulous publisher, everywhere in the world except North America. They took Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Europe, England, United Kingdom, in the English language. Then we got 4 foreign language publishers. And it was released in 2003 in hardback. And then in 2004 it was released in paperback. And within 2 weeks of it being released in paperback, it was on the London Times bestseller list.
Congratulations on that accomplishment.
Yes, just incredible. It literally took a life of its own. I think because it touched so many people, because depression really has a stigma. And to just put it out there and say, you know, this happens. And you can have everything. You can have a husband who loves you, 2 wonderful children, church, beautiful house, no more financial problems at that time. And you can still fall apart if you haven't sorted out your life.
It's interesting that we're talking about this, because just the other day someone told me that I don't understand depression.
Yeah.
Is this a tough thing to understand, in your opinion?
Do you know, to those who've never experienced it, yes. My husband had never experienced it before, and when I tried to tell him how I was feeling, he used to say, and he was trying to help me, he'd say, well, you know, think positively, count your blessings, you know, just look at all we have. And then at times, which used to make me feel really guilty, he'd say, what more can I give you to make you happy? And I would say, I so appreciate everything I have. And that makes me feel even more guilty, because I wake up in the morning and it's like swimming through fog. I can't put my thoughts together. It's devastating to go through. It really, it's like swimming in mud.
And I hate to interrupt you, but
No.
for people who are listening to this now and maybe are going through depression, because, you know, maybe it's, as I get older, I'm hearing that people have more and more depression, you know. As people are listening to this who have depression, what advice would you give them?
Get help. Get help. So many people try and just keep going themselves. And so for me, it would be just don't give up. There's help out there. Get help. Whether it be if you go to church, start with your church, with small groups there maybe. If you don't go to church, find a therapist. You go to therapy. And again, don't just settle for a therapist. It's got to be somebody that you really feel you can unload to. Somebody. Can I tell you a short story?
Sure.
I didn't know anything about therapy when I was sent when Chris took me for therapy. I'd just given up. And I said to Robin Royston, how can you help me? You don't know me. I know me. I know everything about me, but I don't know what's wrong. How can you help me? What am I meant to do? And he said, you're not meant to do anything. He said, I went to Spain once and I went to climb a mountain. And I got to the bottom of the mountain, I looked up and I thought, how am I going to climb this mountain? And then I saw a little path and I followed it. It went behind a scrubby little bush. When I got to the bush, I saw it carried on. Sometimes it got to a barren patch where I had to look around a little, and then I'd pick it up again. Sometimes I had to go down below a rocky outcrop before I could go up again. But I followed that path just as far as we could see, and it took me to the top of the mountain. And he said, that's what we're on, is your path. We don't know where it's going to lead. You're just going to tell me about your life. And as you tell me about your life, we'll just explore it. And sometimes we might get to a barren patch. And I'll just ask you how your life's going now. And you tell me about it now. But just as you tell me, he said, we're just on a path and I'm walking with you and we'll get to the top of your mountain. And that took the pressure off me, that basically there was somebody who wasn't expecting me to be well immediately, somebody who was going to walk with me, and it would just unfold. And that's exactly what it did.
It sounds like you have a remarkable story, very interesting, at times up and at times down.
Yes.
When does your book come out here in the States?
It comes out in November.
Okay.
I hope. And the interesting thing is, the same book has had 4 different titles, and it's all the same book. And that's what's difficult. It was called by Random House. They called it Out of the Dark. Our German publishers called it Plucking the Moon from the Bottom of the Sea. The Dutch publishers called it The Track of the Man.
Interesting.
The Hebrew-Swedish called it Out of the Dark, and in America it'll be known as Touch the Moon and Say Goodnight.
So interesting that the same book could have so many titles.
And different covers. And the Touch the Moon and Say Goodnight, that's from when I was a child and we were being raised by housekeepers when my dad went away. I used to get really frightened, and he would say to me, when I'm away at 8 o'clock, you go out and you look at the moon and you say goodnight to me, and wherever I am, I'll look at the moon at 8 o'clock and I'll say goodnight to you. And so we used to say goodnight through the moon.
Well, you know, we could talk for hours and hours, because just the story in Africa, in England, your personal journey, and then your husband passing the bar exam. I know that's a tough test. I've sat through it. But we're almost out of time this week on the program. Real fast, any website or telephone number people can reach you at or can learn more about you?
Absolutely. My full website is just lindacaine.com. I am going to have a studio website because I actually teach calligraphy, but that's going to be up and running in about a week. And Fresno Art Hub for any classes is just fresnoarthub.com.
Thank you so much for coming on the program this week. Thank you for sharing such a remarkable story. Good luck with the book, and we'd love to have you back when it gets published.
Thank you, Sevag.
That wraps it for this edition of the Central Valley Ledger. You can watch more episodes of the Central Valley Ledger on CMAC's channels Xfinity 93, Uverse 99, or on CMAC's website, www.cmac.tv. You can listen to the episodes of the Central Valley Ledger on 90.7 FM KFSR Fresno. Thank you so much to the volunteer crew that made this production and every production possible. We couldn't do it without you. To become a volunteer, visit CMAC's website and click on the membership tab. Thanks again to our guest, Linda Caine, for sharing her personal story, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week with a new edition.
KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger every Sunday morning at 11:30. For a complete program schedule, visit kfsr.org.